All right, well, good evening, everybody. Thank you all for coming out, and thank you for viewing at home. We're also taping this because we're going to play it a few times between now and the election time so that everybody who wants to understand these better can get a chance to do that. So I appreciate everybody that's out here today, our speakers especially, who've come out to do this, some of those of you who are out in our audience, and Christy for just keeping it going with the kind of content that's going to make our business community really understand the issues. Our Chamber of Commerce takes on issues. Sometimes we will tell our members what we've all decided through our public policy process that allows us to vet each issue. What we try to do is do a 360 vetting of each issue to make sure that we understand our opinions and then we understand everyone else's opinions. Because the Chamber of Commerce, while we say we're a purple pelican, we know that nobody's purple out there. Everybody's either red or blue, and all we do is got to make sure that we understand where are our members at. And every issue has a different perspective. We have taken a position on one of the issues you're going to hear about tonight, and that's the ad valorem tax issue. We believe that every issue that we're working on gets solved when you have a great job. We can really make a difference on all the other issues we're working on if we continue to be competitive for the kind of jobs that are being created in our economy today. The communities around us all have this tax incentive, and we used to have it, we don't have it anymore. We lost by only 200 votes a while back, and we just felt it important, as we heard from our EDC, who is in competitive situations on a daily basis for those kind of jobs, that kind of ability. We know a lot of businesses don't take it, but when you are being compared to the other communities around, St. Pete shouldn't be off that list because of just one of these pieces of that. So that's why we took on that. The other ones you're going to hear about today, we just did not have a solid roadmap of whether we couldn't hear from all 360, that we didn't get the 360 feedback that we were hopeful of, the timing ran out, or we just did not have our public policy, one of our committees did not have a clear-cut recommendation. We did not have a consensus of what our opinions are. It is hard to be a consensus leader. It's a lot more fun just to say, I want it that way. We're not that kind of community either. So what I'm hopeful of is that we can be respectful and appreciative of everybody's ideas and opinions. And then when we get into that voting booth, we vote how we want to vote, and we come back and we become respectful and civil to everybody we're working on. Because this is a long-term thing we're doing. Building a community isn't one vote. Building a community is hundreds and hundreds of votes made by hundreds and hundreds of all of us making those decisions at a time. So let's have fun tonight. Let's make sure the ice cream doesn't melt, so I'm going to stop talking and make sure we can get some ice cream as well. But let's get through these. If you have any questions, I really am looking for inputs on this so that we can understand it. We are recording it, and we're going to be transcribing some of this as well for the questions so we can give the flavor back to those of you who are watching from home and that will be viewing it in the days to come. All right? So Christy, thank you very much. Let's get started.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Chris. Wonderful. Okay, to kick us off, I'm honored to welcome State Representative Michelle Rayner. She has served as a member of the Florida House of Representatives since 2020, representing District 70 in Pinellas, Hillsborough, and Sarasota counties. Representative Rayner is here to tell us about the 3 state constitutional amendments that are on your ballot this November 8th. We'll get there. You guys are doing well. We would love to hear about how these amendments ended up on the ballot and what implications would be for a yes or a no vote here in the St. Petersburg community.
Oh, great, I'm coming up.
Or stand right there or sit right there. You got it, girl.
So, hello everyone, how are you?
Hello. Very
good.
good.
I love a little feedback. So, I'm going to talk a little bit about the amendments. I will tell you, I have friends who are involved in this process who are like, there were amendments on the ballot. I'm like, yeah, there are. And so, there are 3 amendments. And a lot of times, I know that I get questions, and even I have to go back and look and say, what is this on this ballot? So I'm really happy to be here with you. It also caused me to make sure that I was digging deeper, knowing what the implications are. And a lot of times when we're thinking about, to Chris's point, it feels like it's just this red or blue partisan issue. And so, it was really hard to kind of find like, just give me the facts. Like, just give me what it is, what we're talking about. So I will say a resource that I love is the League of Women Voters. They always are just, here it is, and this is what we're doing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the 3 different amendments that we have. I'm going to talk about how they got on the ballot, and what a no vote would be, and what a yes vote would be. So first off, let me level set with you. There are 3 ways that a amendment can get on the ballot. So it can be through a citizen-led initiative. Who knows what a citizen-led initiative is? Yeah. Oh. If I had like a gift, I would give it to you. So it's a petition. So many of us may think of like the most popular one, most recent history, Amendment 4, where people were signing up, and that's how Amendment 4 got on the ballot. Also, another way that an amendment can get on the ballot is through the legislature. So I'm a member of the legislature. So the legislature can say, we want to put this amendment on the ballot, and we want to let the people vote for it. So that is the second way. The third way is through the Constitutional Revision Committee. So that is a committee that meets every 20 years. They review the committee, and they review the Constitution rather, and it's bipartisan. It's made up of Democrats and Republicans. Our own Senator Roussan was on the last one, and they go through the Constitution and they suggest what could be amended in the Constitution. So those are the 3 ways that anything gets on your ballot through, the amendment process. So I'm going to start with number 1. And so number 1's really interesting to me because it deals with flood insurance, and it deals with protecting your home from floods. And a lot of times I get this question as a legislature, Michelle, like, what are you going to do about floods? And I was like, talk to Congressman Charlie Cruz because this is a congressional federal issue. And so the first amendment is Amendment 1. It's the limitation on assessment of real property used for residential purposes. So if y'all read that title, you're like, what does that mean? And then I'm not even going to bore you with the ballot summary because the wording is wild, but actually I will bore you with it. Proposing an amendment to the state constitution effective January 1st, 2023, so in a few months, to authorize the legislature by general law to prohibit the consideration of any change or improvement made to real property used for residential purposes to improve the property's resistance to flood damage in determining the assessed value of such property for ad valorem taxation purposes. Who, by a show of hands, who can tell me what that means? Okay. All right, go ahead. I'm gonna let y'all go ahead because you listen. So when you hear that, what does that mean?
It means that they cannot make any law to increase your value if you are taking steps to mitigate.
Come on up here and present this. Okay, gotcha.
I agree. I would assume by reading it that if you made improvements to protect your home from flood, that would increase the value of your home for taxation.
100%. Both of you are correct. And once again, if I had a prize, I would give it to you. But thank you. You're absolutely right. Because normally what we know is that if you make improvements to your home, that a lot of times your property insurance goes up and your taxes go up. And we already know we're kind of in a little bit of a property insurance crisis, especially here in Pinellas County, and we feel it a lot more than other folks in other parts of the state. So this would allow the legislature to actually make laws to say, hey, if you are doing something to mitigate flood damage on your home, that your and this is specifically for flood damage, it's not for everything else, specifically for this piece, that it would allow you to not have your taxes go up. And so how this got on the ballot, this actually got on the ballot was proposed by the Florida legislature. So that is actually how this got on the ballot. So a yes vote would authorize the legislature to pass laws that would exempt flood resistance improvements from increasing any property assessments. A no vote would keep it the same way. Keep it just as it is now. So whatever a no vote would it would be as it is. So the question becomes, and this is where I can't tell you, this is, you gotta look at your house, you gotta look where you live, you gotta look at your property and look at where, what you're about. And think about how does this benefit you and how does this benefit our community? I would say, being someone who is a native of Pinellas County, not Pinellas, Pinellas County, and someone who grew up in Clearwater and now lives in St. Pete, and J.C. Pritchard always gives me mess about growing up North County. I think that this would be something that would be rather helpful to our county, knowing what we almost experienced, less than a month ago, and how that could have been devastating, catastrophic to us. And so if we're taking steps to mitigate damage to our home, this could be helpful. And some folks, they may want to stay the way it is. They don't want anybody to change anything, and that's okay. So that is something that you want to think about when you're thinking about looking at your ballot on when November what? 8th. So yes, so when you're looking at your ballot November 8th, even when you're talking to your friends, that is something that I would really urge you to think about, okay? So this next one is really interesting to me. So y'all remember how I told you the 3 ways something gets on the ballot, right?
Yes.
The legislature, citizen-led initiatives, and the Constitution Revision Commission. Well, Amendment 2 is to abolish the Constitution Revision Commission. And so we could say that the Constitution Revision Commission did not propose this one to get on the ballot, that this was proposed by the legislature. The ballot summary, it says, proposing the amendment to the state constitution to abolish the Constitution Revision Commission, which meets in 20-year intervals and is scheduled to next convene in 2037 as a method of submitting proposed amendments or revisions to the state constitutions, to electors of the state for approval. The amendment does not affect the ability to revise or amend the state constitution through citizen initiative, which is really important because there has been a move in the legislature to stop citizen-led ballot initiatives. So they want to be very clear, it doesn't stop that. But through constitutional convention, the Taxation Budget Reform Commission, or through legislative joint resolution. So those are other ways that you can amend the Constitution. However, the 3 ways that you will see those amendments are through the legislature, the CRC, and citizen ballot initiatives. So I have an opinion on this, but I'm going to tell you my opinion. So obviously, if you vote yes, it would eliminate the CRC that was created in 1968. It meets every 20 years. So it will leave just now 2 ways for amendments to get on the ballot: through the legislature, which is a partisan body, or through a citizen-led initiative, which is a lot of work, right? A no vote would preserve the CRC and its ability to present amendments to voters every 2 years. The originator of this amendment is the Florida legislature. So when you're thinking about it, think about the way the Florida legislature is composed. You may like it, you may not like it. I have my own opinion about it. You can probably figure out what my opinion would be. But figure out what it is. Do we want to have a body that is partisan to tell us what's going to be on the ballot, or the CRC, which is inherently bipartisan? You have folks who are politicians, you have folks who are doctors, you have folks who are business owners, you have folks who are from every walk of life that are on this commission, right? And they only meet every 20 years. So once again, it's thinking about, when we're thinking about the future of our state, how do we want it to progress? How do we want it to look? And so that is something you should think about. And the League of Women Voters will tell you their position and tell you why that, they feel that way. But that is something that I would offer to you. Once again, that's going to come down to you in the voting booth on when? November what? 8th. All right, that's what I like to hear. So we have, yes ma'am.
So what was the legislature's motivation?
So the legislature's motivation was basically to kind of consolidate power, consolidate the ability. And that's where you've seen there's been bills that have failed where they wanted to abolish the ability for citizens to do citizen-led ballot initiatives. So it's about a consolidation of power. So, any other questions so far? That was a really good question, thank you. That's why I laughed, because oh yes. Okay, so let's do the last amendment, Amendment 3. Additional homestead property tax exemption for a specified critical public service workforce. That's a lot. It's a lot of words. The originator of it, how this got on your ballot, is once again the Florida legislature. So the ballot summary is this: proposing an amendment to the state constitution to authorize the legislature by general law to grant an additional homestead tax exemption for non-school levies up to $50,000 of the assessed value of homestead property owned by classroom teachers, law enforcement officers, correctional officers, firefighters, emergency medical technician, paramedics, child welfare service professionals, active duty members of the armed forces and Florida National Guard. This amendment will take effect January 1st, 2023. So what does that mean, y'all? Yeah. Do you know that, doctor? Go ahead, share with us.
That the legislature can pass a law, although I'm wondering, does that trickle down? Do the local counties have to then also authorize that, or is that just blanket at the state level? Because since taxation is at the county level.
So that's a really good question.
Yeah.
So this would, to your point, this would allow them to do a property exemption of $50,000 for these folks that fall in the specified workforce. So essentially, there's a whole thing called local rule, right? Like home rule. So I, as a state representative, should not be able to tell Councilmember Brady Gabbard, this is what you're going to do from the state level, because I'm the state, she's the city. So when you do this, to your point, you're telling the city, this is what you're going to do. And so when you think about it, there's pros and cons to it. You have folks who are the backbone and the foundation of our community, right? And you know, folks who maybe should make more than they make now, and you know, and oftentimes are on the front lines, are frontline workers. So there's a way to think about how that would be helpful to them. But there's also a way to think about when we're thinking about home rule and we're thinking about the separation of governments and knowing that it's our local government, I believe, and this would be my opinion, I believe our local government knows better than the state how our city should run. I just do. That's like Washington, D.C. coming to tell me what Tallahassee should do. Like, I don't, like, no, like, you stay there, we will stay here, and you will stay there. So a yes vote would allow the legislature to create a new $50,000 homestead exemption for the folks who are in the position that I just named. It would exclude the exemption from assessments for school properties. The cost to local governments, and this is where, to your question, the cost to local governments is $85.9 million in lost revenue for fiscal year 2023 to 2024, growing to $96 million in 2026 and 2027. The state would make up for the losses in Florida's 29 fiscally constrained counties, primarily rural counties, the Panhandle and South Florida's interior. That bill would trigger a companion bill that puts the exemption in effect in January 1st, 2023. So you are looking from an $85.9 million to $96 million, almost $1 billion hit to our local governments if you vote yes on it. Yes, sir.
Yes, and would this require monitoring the employment status of people who got this exemption?
Correct. We haven't even gotten to that. So like, what if you are a law enforcement officer, but you decide, like, I'm retired, like, I don't want to do this anymore? What if you're a teacher and, you know, we know that there's a teacher shortage? Or what if you no longer want to be a nurse or whatever you're in? That would require, you know, a monitoring. And we haven't even addressed that. That is also an additional cost.
Yeah, I say that could be an attestation type of setup. I mean, I know my home is zoned to family, and every year I have to sign a paper to the county tax assessor saying I'm not renting that, you know, I'm using all the property for myself, so I, you know, keep my homestead. So that, I think that's easily solved, and under penalty, you know, challenge me if you answered it incorrectly, but I think I have some problems with it, like what if it's just blanketly an EMT? I was an EMT for many years, but I wasn't practicing. You know, if you hold that license, you hold that certification, it would have to, have some, you're part-time, or you're full-time, you're a teacher, but you're a substitute teacher.
Absolutely, and I think that's the nuances to this. And then obviously a bill would be drafted, which talks about the companion bill that would have to be drafted to address some of those points you just said. Like, what does it mean to be an EMT? What does it mean to be a teacher? What does it mean to be, a child welfare worker? So obviously, what we reject lawmakers giving the ability to create a new $50,000 homestead exemption for certain public occupations. It would have no effect on the property tax revenue collected by government. And it would move the bill that would have created a new homestead exemption if the amendment had passed. So those are really the long and short of the three. And once again, I think you have to think about when you're voting on November 8th, how this is going to affect your community. If you're a business owner, how this will affect your business. And if you are just an part of your community, and like how this will affect us. And also, do you want all of these amendments were originated by the Florida legislature, and do you want a body to have that much power over what gets done? So I will take any questions and then I will sit down. Yes.
Can I assume that implementation and continued verification would happen at the county level then?
So what I would probably see, and normally what the legislature does, is when we tell local government, not we, but when there's a bill, because I don't tell them, but when they tell local government what they want to do, there is what we call an unfunded mandate. Basically meaning this is what we're going to tell you to do. This is how you're going to do it. And then you're going to do it that way. And the cost is going to be on y'all to maintain whatever record keeping, whatever, even if it's an attestation form, they got to hire somebody to put that in, to do all of that. So it's basically the state giving this mandate, but they're not giving them extra money to do what they need to do.
Okay. And that was my second question.
Yeah.
Is there a cost estimate on everything?
So there has not been, because the bill technically, so if this amendment passes, then there will be a bill drafted to put all of this information, and that's what happens when we're in the legislative process. Those are, great questions, and I sit on government operations, so I would probably see that bill. That was something that we would have to ask, like if we're going to now, the people have said we're going to do this, are we going to give our local governments the money to be able to actually carry out this task? Normally, I can tell you the answer is probably going to be no. Or if it is, it's going to be very de minimis compared to what we should be giving them.
Thank you.
Yes, anyone else? Yes.
Me?
Yes, yes ma'am, yes ma'am.
Going back to amendment number 1.
Yes.
Anywhere in that, the language of that amendment, does it specify what constitutes improvements to the home? I mean, I can guess what they are, but is there any clear definition what the improvements to the home are?
So it says exempt flood resistance improvements such as elevating structures, filling basements, and waterproofing, as well as improvements to allow for stormwater runoff, waterproofing basements, installing check valves capable of preventing water backup, and elevating furnaces, heaters, and electrical panels.
And it's just limited to that?
I believe at this point, yes, it's just limited to that.
So like I envision someone building a new pool saying, hey, it's for stormwater runoff. Is that like, no, I mean, that's where my mind goes with this. I mean, we gotta get creative.
I mean, but to the point, there's obviously gonna be folks that would come in.
Is there someone approving?
I'm sure there will be, but once again, this actually hasn't been a bill yet. So this is an amendment, and then it's gonna go through, and we're gonna, make it what it is. But yeah, I mean, these are really good questions. Like, while I think it's, it's a good amendment when we think about sustainability, but I think that's also to the verification point about it as well. Anyone else? All right, well, thank you so much.
That was amazing. There's 3 state amendments. There's only 2 and one of everyone else, so don't worry. We're doing okay.
Yeah.
I love it.
I
Thank
have
you.
the heavy lifting today.
That's amazing information, and it's great to know the origination of where those come from as well, so thank you so much for sharing that. Next, we are privileged to have with us City Council Vice Chair Brandy Gabbard. Vice Chair Gabbard represents District 2 in the north section of St. Petersburg. She assumed office in 2018 and won re-election in 2021. Vice Chair Gabbard is here today to explain the 2 city charter amendments that are on the ballot on November 8th. Okay, gotta make this. Okay, these amendments deal with elections and city council requirements, which both carry short and long-term implications for the future of our city.
Well, good evening, everyone. So my job is much easier than Representative Rainer's because I have the 2, but it's much harder because I have to follow her. So we'll get right into it. As Chrissy mentioned, there are 2 that have to deal with the way that our elections are held and the redistricting process that we recently went through. So the first one that I will go through is the rescheduling of the municipal elections to occur in conjunction with national and state elections in even years. So what does that mean? It means the City of St. Petersburg Charter currently requires that we run our municipal elections in odd numbered years. So City of St. Pete residents, you will remember that last year you voted for council members. You voted for districts 2, 4, 6, and 8, and you voted for our mayor. So that was an off year, correct? This proposed amendment arose out of discussions that happened during that time. And those discussions really revolved around how we as a city, because we were in those off cycles, could facilitate early voting in the city of St. Petersburg. We had a lot of debate about that through the process of trying to determine how to really get more voter turnout, because that's really the whole goal here, right, is to get more voter turnout. The city contracts with Pinellas County Supervisor of Elections to administer our city elections. And essentially, the city is responsible to pay for the cost of elections that do not occur at the exact same time as other state and federal elections, and even some of the county elections. And so the cost of that at the time was considered to be too cost prohibitive for the city to be able to manage early voting. Being able to bring it into the actual even cycles would actually encourage more participation, and it would allow for those early voting to actually be able to be held. So what would that do? A vote of yes, as I said, would move us into even numbered years, and it would significantly increase that voter turnout. Once again, you referenced the League of Women Voters. They did a lot of advocacy around this piece and have some really great information on their website about actually encouraging and getting that voter turnout to be higher. So that would be one of the things that would happen. It would also help to reduce that money that the city would individually spend on those elections. However, a yes vote makes really the cost of running for office much higher. You've got to think, you're going to have a lot more people on the ballot. You're going to have a much longer ballot. You are going to have very big names that are going to be on the ballot. People running for governor, people running for president, people running for state house. And so you're going to have municipal elections kind of lumped all in with that. And so with this one, you really kind of have to weigh the pros and cons as it pertains to, do we want to get that better turnout, with the result of that possibly being that then it becomes harder and more expensive for local individual politicians to be, or want to be politicians, to run for office. So that's kind of the pros and cons of what that yes vote would mean. The last thing that's really important that I want to make sure that people understand is because we are making this change, this would then automatically give the current mayor and all sitting council members 1 extra year on their current terms. So that's an important piece that I think people should make sure that they know. When we had a discussion about it in council, and it's funny because We come here and we talk publicly about these things, and I'm not advocating one way or the other. This is all about facts, right? But when we vote to put these things on your ballot, we obviously have opinions. And there was a lot of conversation about the idea of increasing that turnout, the idea of being able to, help more people vote, but maybe it's harder to actually run. That unintended consequence of doing this, if it does pass, was that the city council members. And so that wasn't even really a whole lot of our conversation whenever we voted about it. But it does end up being something that I think it's important for the voters to realize is that you're really extending everyone's terms if you vote yes on this. A no vote would essentially leave everything the way that it is. So pretty simple on the no vote piece of that. Are there any questions about that one? Yes, Chris.
So this came out of the city charter review?
No, it did not. So essentially this came out of city council in a lengthy conversation that went through our committee process.
Did it go unanimous?
Yes, it did end up going unanimous.
Unanimously, the city council gave themselves the ability to get one extra year.
Unintended consequence, right? Yes. So, I mean, I'm not going to speak for my colleagues, but I don't know that all 8 people are really looking for another year, right? So, yes.
What's the estimate of the cost to be holding these off-year elections?
Oh, we did some work with the supervisor of election last year. I think it was going to be, I want to say upwards of $100,000 or something to that effect. At last year, it was kind of determined. We do our budget years October to September 30th, October 1st to September 30th. And at the time that we would have had to have made that decision, the money was not available. We would have had to find it somewhere. And it was just too cost prohibitive. And quite frankly, the supervisor of elections, there just wasn't the bandwidth to be able to do that specifically for the city.
That's for the early voting. I'm saying in general, what is the cost to have an election that is solely St. Pete focused versus lumping ourselves in with everybody else?
I would have to go back and refer to our clerk, but it's very substantial.
1.1 million.
And then there's also, voting machines. We would have to, I've been told we'd have to purchase our own voting machines. Then that can get very costly. You have to staff those. I mean, there's a whole extra piece for the city to actually run our own elections. So it's much more advantageous fiscally for us to partner with the county, with the supervisor of elections, and get those things lined up. So you really have to weigh the pros and cons of that from a fiscal standpoint. Yes?
Was there any discussion on the down ballot impact on some of these where?
There was, yeah. I mean, you're looking at it, and if you have a year where you have a lot of state races, you have, congressional races, maybe it's a presidential year. I mean, certainly, we kind of talked about that a little bit beforehand. The further down a ballot something is, the less likely it is that you have full voter, participation, because there's ballot fatigue, and that happens all the time. We talk about that more typically when it comes to these sort of referendums and these sort of ballot initiatives. But I think that same thing then goes whenever it comes to actual voting for your representation. Further down the ballot you go, the less likely that people get all the way there, unfortunately.
Because I would just comment, I've seen in the Southeast at least, people are elected sheriff that have no law enforcement. People are elected superintendent that have no educational background, but they were in the right place.
Right. Yeah. Or maybe have a name ID. I mean, name ID goes a lot into the psychology of where you want to see things on the ballot. So there's a lot to weigh when it comes to actually how we put this forward.
Hey, Randy, did the city council talk about the history of that decision before? Why are we in these odd years anyway? I mean, I know I've heard the stories, but I don't know if they, I just didn't.
We didn't get too much into it, knowing that we would be doing our redistricting this year, and we were doing our charter review last year, so kind of a wonky time to be looking at these sort of things. A lot of moving pieces. A lot of moving pieces. Yes?
If this was voted yes, would there be no elections at all during those odd years?
So there would be, no, there would not be. They would only be on the even years. So for instance, I was voted in 2017 the first time. Instead, that would have then been 2018.
I wasn't sure if anything else would be voted on.
Now, I mean, there are, special elections sometimes that happens. Every now and then we'll get like a referendum issue or something like that that would go to special election. I think the last one we had maybe was the Rowdies whenever they were looking at going with MLS. So, I mean, those sort of things could potentially still happen, but the actual elected representatives would not. Okay. Well, then we will move on to the second one, which actually changes the city council residency requirements to accommodate the redrawing of district boundaries through the redistricting process. So that is a lot, so that's a mouthful. Essentially to say that, the first thing I want to say is we actually have two commissioners. I think Mr. Pritchett is still here. We did our redistricting commission this year, so I would be remiss if I didn't recognize Darla Odie. She represented my district, District 2, and then JC Pritchett was also here a few moments ago. They both served on the redistricting commission this year. And so a lot of things kind of come up whenever you're going through this process. So essentially, where this one came from was City Council determined to put this on the ballot due to our current requirements that City Council members leave office immediately if they cease to reside within the boundaries of their district. So who's familiar with what's been going on at City Council when it comes to leaving your district, right? So, I know, add that to the list, right? So essentially that's what our charter says. Like, if you are no longer in the district by your residency, you are done. You have to vacate immediately. Well, we're redistricting. And so that could then have the unintended consequences of literally, once we accept those maps, drawing people who have been duly elected by the voters out of their district, out of no fault of their own. So essentially, a yes vote on this one would allow city council members whose district boundaries have been redrawn to remain in office for the full term of which they were elected, provided that they remain a resident of the original district or the new district boundaries. So I would say myself, for instance, where I live in my district, if that line were to get drawn and it were of no fault of my own, I could then, if the vote is yes, I could then stay in my seat until the end of my term. So as long as I did not move, as long as I didn't change anything of my own, workings, then I could remain in the seat for that period of time. A no vote essentially leaves the current requirements of the residency in place, and any council member that is on our council who ends up getting redrawn will have to immediately vacate the seat. Yes?
How often do they do that where they redraw?
Every 10 years,
Every 10.
after the census data. So we do the charter every 10 years, and then we do redistricting every 10 years. So it's always the very next year. Yes?
So does this have a sunset to the current redistricting, or is it going to be an infinity to accommodate every 10 years of redistricting?
Yes, this is a charter amendment, so this would stand until it would get revised through another charter amendment. Yes?
Do you have any idea why they didn't already do this through other redistricting?
We don't. Our legal team, this was something that they actually brought forward to us, and it was a bit of just kind of a loophole, if you will, in our charter. I don't know that maybe anybody had necessarily been affected by it in the past, so it didn't raise a red flag, but our legal team brought it up to us as a process of the redistricting and just wanted to make us aware of kind of the ramifications if there were dramatic changes and say 3 or 4 council members got drawn out. Now you don't have a quorum. Now you can't continue to, so legal threw up some red flags and said, this is something that I think we need to take up and we need to see if the voters agree and if we should change it. So that's essentially what it's about, right? Both of these are about the voters deciding if they believe that these two are important. And so they will, and we will see where everything lands. But those are the only two that we have for the city of St. Pete this year. So are there any other questions? When are we voting?
November 8th.
All right, very good.
We have to have a little bit of audience participation.
Yeah.
We're talking about the stellar subject of ballot initiatives, y'all. Okay, fabulous. We're almost to the end. You guys are doing amazing. Anyone need an ice cream break? We will not
Ice cream is good.
get you any points off for grabbing some ice cream. Okay. We are going to welcome Dr. Heng Hein. He joined the Dali Museum as Executive Director in 2002. Dr. Hein will outline the City of St. Petersburg referendum question number 1. That's a foreshadowing. There might be another one coming. Pertaining to the amending of the city lease owned property near the Dali Museum. Again, this ballot initiative will be with you on or before November 8th. Dr. Hein.
Thank you, Christy, and Chris, thank you for inviting us here. This has been very informative, and I have to say entertaining. Great, I'm afraid mine's a little dry.
Never.
We want to just explain who and what the Dali Museum is before we talk about the referendum that impacts that. And I'm happy to answer any questions afterwards. And also Karen Lang Johnston, who's the chair of our board, is here today as well, and she would be happy to answer any questions. So just who we are. We're the most visited single artist museum in America. We have the preeminent collection of this artist's work in the world. And in terms of single artist museums and the importance of collections, there are only maybe 1 or 2 museums in the country that have such a high representation of their artist's work as the Dali. We are an educational institution. We don't just hang pictures on the wall. We educate all ages, and we use art to show how you can solve sometimes intractable problems by loosening the imagination the way the artists did, particularly Salvador Dali. We're a pioneer in the use of innovation, and this is our brand and really the reason we need the expansion. We built the current building that has been called one of the 10 buildings you must see in your lifetime in 2011 with the idea that it would hold very efficiently our collection. However, we branched out into something that we know really helps people connect to art, and that is technology. Interactive art exhibits help each of us understand the artist's intent and to help us place ourselves near the artist and that work. So that kind of lesson is one that builds empathy. We learn that the world is not just fixed. Dali's melting of the world and his double images shows us that the world is not just one way. We have to have tolerance, we have to have empathy, we have to have flexibility of thought. We're a real destination, as you probably have heard. Since the pandemic, the most we've received is 330,000 visitors last year. We had 450,000 pre-pandemic, and each of those people are coming to spend money in the community and to enjoy other museums and other cultural attractions, and even our restaurants, and buy gasoline in our stations, stay in our hotel. We're also very present online, and that puts St. Petersburg on the map in many ways. However, we're most active, I would say, in our community as educators. We have a Dali mobile that goes out to every public school and gives every student in the public education system in Pinellas County an experience of mathematics and proportion through the work of Dali. We have a fashion design program, Teen Voices, and the program I'm most proud of is our junior docents. We did a study with the University of South Florida where we were addressing an epidemic in our communities of a lack of self-esteem in preteens. They're bombarded with images of power and sexuality, and they're not ready for that, and they have a lot of lack of sense of the integrity of the self. So through this program where they learn to express how they feel about art, whether they like something or don't like it, they're given them vocabulary to express themselves, we found that they have an appreciable increase in self-esteem. So it's a very valuable program. We produced 30,000 teachers' guides printed and have them online perpetually. And we started doing these interactive exhibitions in 2014. We really are the leader in the museum industry in these, but they take a lot of space. Some of you see perhaps the Van Gogh Live exhibition. That was done in 5,000 square feet, and it was intended to be in a 20,000 square foot space, which we don't have. And we would like to build one. So we want to create these interactive galleries. We don't have space ample on our current leasehold. So we asked the city if we could expand our footprint. In our own garden, we're building a dome that will mitigate some of the difficulties of showing at least one of our interactive exhibitions. We have about 20, and we need space for all of them. So phase 2, which would build to the west side of the current Dali Museum, that phase 2 would require that the city add to our leasehold a strip of land about 40 feet wide and 170 feet long, which is currently an access road, one of the several into the Mahaffey parking garage. And I'll show you a map of that in a second. This is what the architect Jan Weymouth proposed it might look like. Jan is the one who designed our award-winning building, and we're looking for some continuity there. We would double our space to 60,000 square feet. This is really useful because it shows what the referendum pertains to. We were granted in 2004 through referendum this area in the old Bayfront Center, which is designated as waterfront property. Anything in that district is waterfront property. We were given lots 1, 2, and 3 in the city plat for that area. We were not given lot 6, which is in yellow. It's in between the space we already have. It's away from the water. But to add that to the leasehold would require the voters' referendum. And we'll get to exactly what that referendum says presently. So it's very direct as a referendum can be, Brandy, right?
We tried.
Maine City Council approved amendment of the 99-year lease of city-owned property used by the Dali Museum to allow construction of a museum expansion subject to conditions in an ordinance that was approved unanimously by the council. Such conditions address insurance, indemnity, and coordination, operation of the Mahaffey Theater and the Grand Prix, and future development of the surrounding Center for the Arts. Such amendment would not extend the duration of the lease or require city funding for the expansion. And that's a yes or no vote, and it's on the back page of the ballot. We did have a 99-year lease that started in 2010, so it's ticking off the years. However, one of the beauties of the lease, I think both for the museum and for the community, is that it's a renewable lease. So we're really talking something like 175 years, this multi-generational project. And we want to get it right. We want to have space that we can accommodate the needs of this community vis-a-vis art, and particularly in terms of making this collection useful to people. And that's why we asked the city to add that property. We think there are benefits to the community, economic impact, increased education, and spaces for the community. And the path forward requires that yes vote sometime in November. I can't remember what the date was. Thank you. And going through the process of creating a new lease with the city and making sure that we have mitigated any inconveniences to our neighbors, which we've been looking at really scrupulously, and our neighbors are looking at scrupulously as well. And so that's the nature of the referendum. And I think from the museum's viewpoint, there are a lot of positives to it. From Karen Lang Johnston's viewpoint, it means raising a lot of money, so there's some negative consequences for this passing as well. But we think that, I know that there was a concern from our neighbor, Bill Edwards, about the operation of the Mahaffey Theater because it's humming along really well. It's got great programming, and he was concerned. The one thing he voiced to me, he said that we don't want to be having a major performance and have the construction cut through the power line and we go dark. So I think that's a concern, but it's one that we're really working hard to mitigate. But what Bill doesn't know is that before he took over operation of the Mahaffey Theater, there was an operative Mahaffey Theater. And before Kevin Savory took over the operation of the Grand Prix, there was an operative Grand Prix. That's when we built this building. And there was never an interruption for a moment of anybody else's activities. So we guarantee that we will be as careful in the future with that as we have been. I would be very happy to answer questions. Yes?
I don't see any downside, but if it should be voted no, do you have another design?
If it should be voted no, how do we, we're constrained by that lot and then by height because of the runway, the nearby airport. So you have to have a 5% wedge. You can't go over that from the nearest runway. So we would have a lot of trouble going higher than we are right now. That's the, we could only build up.
Okay, and then, so, okay, we'll constrain you.
Yes.
This might be more of a question for Vice Chair Gabbard. Do you know why the city didn't give you that lot 6, that strip of land?
No idea.
Ingress.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's parking.
Those
Did you,
are-
ingress and egress?
Yeah.
So as to get, so for access from both sides of the
Right.
parking garage.
But they feel like it's okay now?
Well, I mean, we deliberated on it quite extensively, had a lot of conversation, and really I think that with the way that the museum has grown, they've shown that that space is needed and necessary, and so we feel like it's now up to the voters. Our waterfront land is very, very precious to us, and it's protected in our charter. And it's important that we're very diligent whenever we do lease that property. And so I feel, in my opinion, and I can give my opinion on this one, I feel that the Dali has proven themselves to be a vital community asset. And it's time for the voters to decide if they want to see that enterprise expand.
We had a plan to answer that question a little bit more fully from the Dali's perspective. We had a plan to use what was called Lot 3, which is about the triangle of land. But there was a stipulation in our lease that 5 years without a Grand Prix need to elapse before we could build on that. And we asked the city to consider that. The Grand Prix didn't think that was a good idea because they used that 3 days a year for the trucks. And we thought we had a plan to have an open first floor so that they could be unimpeded with their storage of the vehicles that support the race, but they didn't like the plan. So we had to think of something else, and the city helped us think of that. I also want to just mention this idea that came up in a recent discussion about the Center for the Arts. It's not a statement of the city's valuing one section of this dynamic arts community above another. It simply was put on a plaque 20 years ago. And so it's the way the city refers to that. I remember getting my hackles up about that when I first saw it. Center for the Arts. You know, where did that come from? Well, it just came, as things do, from people trying to organize information and give them names. Yes, sir.
Are we voting on this specific design or the option to do something?
Oh, thank you. These things always, if I try to give background, it seems like it's part of the issue. It's not. The question is simply, will the voters allow the city to enter into negotiation to expand our lease to include that yellow strip, lot 6? Yeah. Now, that yellow strip is currently used as access, one of, I'd say, 5, 6, or 7 ways of getting into the Mahaffey. There are already curb cuts all around 1st Street South and Dali Boulevard too. But that's how it's currently used. And so there would have to be a substitute entry so that there were multiple entries and egress and exit from the Mahaffey garage. Yes?
What's the peculiarity in our city charter that is putting something like this, that to me seems from a governance perspective to be under the purview of the city charter, to the voters?
Well, that was the position our attorney took with the city attorney, that the original referendum simply said, shall the city enter into a lease with the Dali Museum of certain lands in the old Bayfront Center? And the voters approved that. And so the argument from the attorneys was, it's already approved, certain lands at the city council's discretion, but the city attorney thought that that was not prudent to make that assumption, and so that it should go to the voters.
Going forward, do you put any contract leases of the city onto
waterfront?
That's what I'm saying. That's the peculiarity, is it's the waterfront.
Yes, and that is protected in our charter. Our founding fathers, our waterfront and our park system are protected in our charter from the date of inception of our city. And so it's critically important to the city that we honor that and that we don't mess with that, that we let it be up to
any park, even like Walter Fuller or something like that, if he wanted to do something, it would come back to the.
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
I understand that the design is still early in its conceptual stage. I think it's been considered to have the building cantilever over lot 6 to allow for traffic. Is that right?
Well, I believe that air rights are not distinguishable from ground rights. You can't assume the air rights, I believe, in the waterfront property either. So even a cantilever design, which we discussed with city staff, would require the referendum.
But just to put people's minds at ease, that it is still trafficable.
It could still be trafficable.
To the Mahaffey garage, so lot 6 is still, because of the cantilever, up and over. Well,
yes.
I think it's important that everyone just remember, we're not voting on a design. We're voting on the ability for the Dali to utilize that lot to expand, whatever that ends up looking like.
Yes.
And that will be negotiations and conversations down the road. But for now, the question is, should they be allowed to utilize this lot to expand?
And one of the prevalent misunderstandings that goes with any referendum is you assume that there's a financial cost to the city. And of course, yielding that land is valuable, but there is no obligation of the city to fund in any way the expansion.
I have one question. Oh, just one more. So you're a gem of the community, so I hope you win. I'll just say that. But more importantly, what are we going to do about the wish tree that came down in the hurricane?
A new wish tree has been planted.
Yay!
We're waiting for it to. It was a little traumatized by being planted. It's dropped its leaves, so we're waiting for it to green out, and then we'll have a celebration of it at
Terrific.
that time.
Yes.
Let
Yes.
me add one thing,
Yes, please.
if I could. And this is not about the expansion, but it's about the history that the Dali has with the Chamber of Commerce. The Dali would not be in St. Petersburg, Florida, if it were not for the St. Petersburg Chamber of Commerce. It was my dad who was president of the chamber. The year that Jim Martin read the article in the Wall Street Journal, and Jim came to the Chamber of Commerce to get their thoughts and ultimately their approval before the museum was ever built or before we went to the Morrises to ask them to give us their collection. So there's a long history, and we thank you for this opportunity.
Wonderful, and thank you for asking about the wish tree. I was just looking at some pictures of my kids with the wish tree, and it's so sad, and we're so glad that there'll be a new reincarnation of that. Wonderful. Well, last but certainly not least, and this will be at the bottom of your ballot, so tell your friends and neighbors to make sure they get to the bottom of the ballot. We have Eric Levina from the Economic Development Analyst in the Economic and Workforce Development Department for your city of St. Petersburg. It's a mouthful. Eric will share information about the history of the ad valorem tax exemption and the proposed referendum question number 2. We made it to the end. As a reminder, the St. Petersburg Area Chamber of Commerce is in support of this referendum, and you guessed it, you can vote on
November 8th.
Okay, take it away, Eric.
Thank you, Chrissy. Thank you, Chamber and members, for the opportunity to share a little bit about this program and hope to provide some voter and education for any conversations, to not influence your decision, but to share facts and operational points about how this program works. So, as Chrissy shared, Economic Development Analyst for the City of St. Petersburg. I've worked at the greenhouse and our small business side for capacity building, curriculum, support procurement for small businesses. I'm currently on the overall economic development side, and here and there I have the occasion to share information about all city incentives related to business and economic development. So hopefully I'll share some information with this as well at the end. Last obstacle towards the ice cream that's shared. It's the last measure on the referendum. So please soak in the information. Overview-wise, what is it? It's a economic development incentive that grants ad valorem tax exemptions for qualifying new businesses and expansions. So with potential relocations for businesses in the city of St. Petersburg, with expansions and retention of businesses, there's the potential of rehabilitation, additions, improvements to facilities, certainly new construction, if that is available for relocating businesses into the area. So with that, there is the corresponding and resultant increased value and assessed value with the taxes. So there's the potential for the ad valorem exemptions to take place if certain job creation, wage targets, and taxable value criteria are met. So just a quick rundown of the job creation targets. If you're within these sectors and approved uses for businesses, manufacturing and targeted industries per state definition, an increase of 10 or more new jobs. If you are business oriented with 15% sales outside of the state of Florida, your target is 25 or more new jobs. If you're in an office setting, that target is going to be at 50 plus. Wage requirement wise for job creation, it's going to have to meet or exceed the Pinellas County, currently at 54,490. The minimum taxable value of improvements in tangible and personal property that's assessed is going to have to be $300K or more. There's an individual project cap for each approved that's at $100,000 exempt taxes per year. So covering the rundown, there's some wiggle room for bonuses as well. If you're essentially doubling those job creation targets, and if you are exceeding the county wage at 125% or more, there's the potential to increase that 5-year bonus. So it's initially at the baseline of 5 years, but that can increase to 10 years per approval if that criteria met. There's additional criteria for eligibility as well if you're a business located in brownfields, so that wage target flexes a little bit to cover 75% of the county wage. So again, we're roughly at $54,490 for the average in Pinellas. That target to 75% comes down to $48,688. And overall, there's a program cap of $1.5 million of exempted taxes. So there isn't going to be any more than that in lost revenue with potential granted authority for these projects. So next slide, this kind of just gets more towards the legislative aspect. This kind of covers the language from state statute that refers to the ability for the city to hold a referendum to allow voters to decide whether or not city council and officials can have grant authority to approve these economic development initiatives that ad valorem one specifically. There's a separate area of the Florida Constitution that specifies the 10-year granting period. So not to be confused with a 5-year timeline for the exempted taxes, this 10-year reference is essentially the window in which city council or officials can exercise that granting authority. So the city's statutory authority to grant exemptions expired in 2021, and it has to go through the cycle of renewal, which will bring us to the next slide. Some background on the more recent past and the current referendum events that have occurred. Starting off with August in 2011, City Council went through that process. They adopted the ordinance to call for a citywide referendum that went to the ballot in, I'll play this game, November, but in 2011. So, by the margins of that, that referendum item at the time was approved by almost a margin of 67%. So fast forward to last year in 2021 and went through the same motions. It had its first reading, I think, in July of that year and was approved. And then in August, if I stand corrected, it went to a public hearing in which it was approved for the November ballot of 2021. That failed by, I believe, 87 votes. So that kind of gets to the issue of what we discussed earlier, maybe voter fatigue, positioning on the ballot, the universe odd, and what the voting items were up front before this, because I think this might have been towards the end as well. So that plays into that. Another point to note over here, just in how common this is, there are a couple of examples of the jurisdictions that have this particular program. It's kind of at the state level where there's an authority in the referendum, but then individually through various municipalities, through different counties, there's the availability to approve it for granting authority. So Hillsborough County, Pinellas, City of Tampa, and Clearwater, Largo, those are some kind of localized, more regional examples of jurisdictions with this program. This kind of follows up to the next bullet point over here. This incentive is an added tool for our economic development toolbox for both recruitment and retention, as I detailed. So the overall point and takeaway, addressing kind of more the yes or no with that, it's a consistent tool that we've seen throughout the state of Florida in these examples alone. So the yes kind of keeps this sort of tool in the toolbox there to hopefully give us a competitive advantage. We're diminishing those tools that we've seen at the state side and other levels of government. These tools are dwindling. There's certain perception about them. Some of them have gone away over the years. The enterprise zone, the QTI program at the state level. So in essence, when we're thinking about these at the local level, if there's a comparison of the size of the toolbox, there's a potential to kind of lose businesses to other outlying areas, other cities, other counties. This extends outside of the Tampa Bay area. If you kind of look at that at a more scaled level on the statewide or nationwide level, we're talking about those state examples of incentives that have gone away over the years. It puts us a little bit less out of a competitive advantage also when a site selector or somebody who's working on behalf of the company to choose a site, one city or over the other, they're kind of comparing apples to apples, what's available in the economic development toolkit from city to city, county to county. So there's that kind of disadvantage when there is one less arrow in the quiver, so to speak. So that kind of gets to the yes or no over there. Some examples of how it's been utilized. It was shared earlier that it's not heavily utilized. There's certainly work that could be done there. to improve on the program, to coordinate with the county who offers a similar program. But these are some in recent history. The two approved ones that come to mind, American Strategic Insurance and Jabil. There's one in progress with Halkey Roberts, and one passed by resolution at a certain level of approval through the robust process that these go through. But they ultimately withdrew, and that company is Power Design. There have been two others that have been in recent talks with our EDC that are kind of more at a confidential level, but those are kind of more business attraction oriented with potential relocations into the city. But that gets to the very question of, what is the perception when there's this tool missing in comparison with other regions, other parts of the country. So next steps wise, this had already taken place in the first bullet. Administration recommended to City Council to approve the ordinance to conduct the referendum. I detailed about that, so it is on the ballot on November 8th.
Come on, Dad.
The referendum, to emphasize that, will give City Council the authority to continue granting the economic development ad valorem tax exemption to new and expanding businesses that are expected to create new full-time jobs in the city. If approved by voters, the ability to grant this exemption would remain until the next 10-year period, which would arrive at November 8th, 2032, and then it would be up for the same renewal process. The program is expected to be administered in the same manner that it currently is. There's some potential tweaks and improvements that I mentioned about that take place at the county level. But yeah, nothing too much is going to change, and that's kind of going to be up for discussion and operations enhancement amongst staff, city council, and other parties involved as well. So to share another point about everything overall, the granting authority is what's being on the ballot over here. So that is not a blanket for any applicants and businesses that come before. It's not going to be an automatic approval to anybody pursuing the incentive. These incentives and projects are still vetted and brought to City Council multiple times when they're considered on an individual basis. So to detail a little bit about that process, it has to go through an approval for eligibility for qualification at first, and it has to go through a resolution process for initial approval with City Council. Then through there, they're allowed to initiate construction. From there, they have to submit a second application, which starts off a process to adopt an ordinance to grant the incentive. And in between there, there's assessment and evaluation from the property appraiser. The project goes before them to kind of assess the potential lost revenue, which is also brought back to City Council for them to kind of deliberate and weigh the pros and cons to their individual deliberation about approving or not approving. So there, through that process, there are two stops through City Council. There's public hearing and then community dialogue and input there. That's built in, so it's not a blanket canvas to approve these. And then there's certainly the weight and analysis of the economic impact that that can transpire as a benefit to the community. These exemptions are only for 5 years, potentially at the baseline, but that helps to induce the project to either come to the city of St. Pete that otherwise wouldn't be here, or to help retain a big company like Jabil to conduct operations and maintain those jobs in the area. And then there is economic analysis that's performed on the indirect and direct economic impact. The employees increase, the wages, what they do for the surrounding economy to other businesses as well. That's stuff that's analyzed and vetted from the property appraisers sort of level, and then definitely the city council and staff as well. So that's what I have to share through there. Happy to answer any questions if you guys have any.
What's the definition of a business? And I asked that question more specifically, what is an apartment complex? A developer comes in to build a high-rise apartment complex. Would that have the opportunity for an exemption? And then my second question is, some businesses commonly are sold after a couple of years. Would the exemption follow the sale?
To answer your first question, yeah, I think I would point to the definitions of who's eligible. The uses kind of fall under manufacturing, targeted industries, business with sales. That has to be 55%. So the business conducted and revenue generated, there's a sort of sales factor that's assessed to give the go-ahead for that particular classification. There's some arts and culture as well, but I think residential isn't included in there. So there are definitions that are specified through the criteria at the local level, and then there's a level of specification also at the state through state statute. To your second question, can you repeat that again?
Does an exemption follow a sale of the business? Would it continue with a new owner?
In my brushing up on this, I know there was language, I think, in Florida statute that covers that in its list of definitions as well, that gets to those lease dynamics as well. I can't speak directly to that. I won't answer what I don't know, but I'm happy to follow up on that too and provide further information. Thank you.
That cap seems kind of modest. It doesn't allow for a lot of cumulative ad valorem exemptions. Are you aware of what other counties and cities in our area have in terms of their caps?
Not aware. I've been in a recent county organized meeting where a lot of the practitioners and local economic developers, they get together and we've talked about improvements and what the status is with their sunsetting and need to go back to referendum. There might have been some shared about caps, but the most discussion that took place was there's sort of nuances in the amount of years that we grant the exception. But were you referring to the individual project cap, the 100,000?
No, the 1.5 million.
1.5. Yeah, I have to learn about that for myself to where the genesis of that particular number was. I'm not sure if that cap was kind of mandated at the local level or if that's a state statute thing. But I'd be curious about that as well. I apologize if you answer that at this time. Yes, sir.
Kind of piggybacks off of what Dr. Hine was saying with the caps. Do you think it's almost more like a symbolic type measure than actual saving the money?
Well, I do. I mean, he can't, I don't know if he can answer that.
Yeah.
Well, as a city, but I can. Absolutely, it is, when you're on an Excel spreadsheet and not in the community, and you don't have that $100,000 on your sheet, that business might not even do it as part of their decision, but they may say, hey, in 5 years, if we grow, we can save $100,000 if we choose this. So a lot of it is about just making sure that those who are making decisions for businesses are understanding that this is it's about a competitive situation. You just heard Eric just tell me how much, I didn't want to hear about how long it is to get $100,000. These businesses sometimes don't even want to do that once they realize it. But they want to know that this city is friendly to business. And recently, our city may have not sent all the messaging about friendly to new jobs in our community, just because we're so freaked out about affordable housing, which we need to be. But so this message will send out to the rest of the Tampa Bay development community and others going, St. Pete's in it for jobs too. And I think that's as much of this whole thing as anything right now.
Yeah, I think I'll echo that point. But still not be at risk of advocating, I'm just speaking to the purpose overall and the framing of the incentive itself as well as any others. It's part of the overall toolbox. Whether there are thoughts on how much is utilized and the amount of that award, it is something that's at the discussion table with site selectors when they're doing initial analysis at different locations. What offerings are available in comparison with other areas. Whether it gets used or not, that gets us to the table up front for initial discussions to narrow down the list of cities in consideration. So we're open to kind of get the city of St. Pete kind of more towards the finish line and more of a finalist, and hopefully, the potential relocation. But the amount, I can see where the line of questioning gets to kind of the symbolic nature, but then I'd say that initiates conversations once we have them more in the door to discuss further what more we can include in a package. This one incentive alone is part of the equation. There are other job creation, talent attraction incentives that we administer as well, and then that allows us to kind of tell a further story of additional sort of support and city services that we can offer to help streamline, help sort of allay the development and build-out process. Offering the navigation through city permitting, the visits through entitlements and development reviews or services and zoning. That's a process in itself. So kind of having this one tool as a part of that overall story to help for that business traction or business retention sort of goal. That's kind of how it answers that question.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Amazing, we made it. Thank you guys so much. And your task today is to take at least one tidbit that you learned, call a friend, text a friend, tell them what you learned that you didn't know before, post it online. Feel free to tag St. Pete Chamber all you want, and tell them that they need to vote A when?
November 8th.
Woo! Everybody's awake. Okay, thank you. So one more reminder, yes, on that, on this referendum, the Chamber believes that this tax exemption is imperative to the continued growth of economic development in our city. A yes vote for referendum question 2 will ensure that current local businesses can stay and grow in our community, and that new businesses will continue to be attracted to the Sunshine City. With that, we will close, and I will thank Representative Rainier, Vice Chair Gabbard, Dr. Hine, and Eric for being here tonight. And reminder of grab on your way out. We do have our next St. Pete Scoop event, November 15th, I believe, SPC Midtown Campus, and we'll be talking about housing solutions for all. So you're invited and invite a friend. Thank you all.